Hello, guys. Welcome back to Examining Fictional Heroes. Know it's been a while. Life, you all know how that goes. We get busy, we've got things that we have to address. So, anyway, I'm going to get back to it. And today I'm going to read an excerpt from Starship Troopers by Robert A. Heinlein. For the record, I thought it was a horrible movie. The book so far has been good. I've heard a lot of quotes from Heinlein, a lot of stuff about him, so I decided to try some of his work. I did read Stranger in a Strange Land. There were some good points to that. I didn't like it as much as I like this one. This is a very good book so far. I have not even finished it. But I have decided to read an excerpt from it because, as usual, the things written about in this work of fiction pertain to our society today. He begins this chapter with a quote from the book of Proverbs. Train a child in the way that he should go, and when he is older, he will not depart from it. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this book. I'm going to start at a point where the young recruit, Johnny Rico, is thinking of someone who had been in their unit, deserted, and had killed a young girl. Him thinking about it and thinking back on a morals and ethics class from Mr. Dubois. Dillinger was the offender, by the way. If Dillinger had understood what he was doing, which seemed incredible, then he got what was coming to him. Except that it seemed a shame that he hadn't suffered as much as had little Barbara Ann. He practically hadn't suffered at all. But suppose, as seemed more likely, that he was so crazy that he had never been aware that he was doing anything wrong. What then? Well, we shoot mad dogs, don't we? Yes, but being crazy that way is a sickness. I couldn't see but two possibilities. Either he couldn't be made well, in which case he was better off dead for his own sake and for the safety of others, or he could be treated and made sane. In which case, it seemed to me, if he ever became sane enough for civilized society and thought over what he had done while he was sick, what could be left for him but suicide? How could he live with himself? And suppose he escaped before he was cured and did the same thing again. And maybe again. How do you explain that to bereaved parents in view of his record? At this point, he began to think back on the class he took when he was in school. And Mr. Dubois asked him, had he ever raised a puppy? To which he said, of course he did. And they got into the methods of training a pup, housebreaking them. to teach them what's wrong, to punish them when they do wrong, so on and so forth. And he begins to tell them what happened in the latter 20th century. Let's get back to these juvenile criminals. The most vicious average somewhat younger than you here in this class, and they often started their lawless careers much younger. Let us never forget that puppy. These children were often caught. Police arrested batches each day. Were they scolded? Yes, often scathingly. Were their noses rubbed in it? Rarely. News organs and officials usually kept their names secret. In many places, the law so required for criminals under 18. Were they spanked? Indeed not. Many had never been spanked, even as small children. There was a widespread belief that spanking, or any punishment involving pain, did a child permanent psychic damage. I had reflected that my father must never have heard of that theory. Corporal punishment in schools was forbidden by law, he had gone on. Flogging was lawful as sentence of court only in one small province, Delaware, and there only for a few crimes, and was rarely invoked. It was regarded as cruel and unusual punishment. Dubois had mused aloud. Do not understand objections to cruel and unusual punishment. While a judge should be benevolent in purpose, his awards should cause the criminal to suffer. Else there is no punishment. And pain is the basic mechanism built into us by millions of years of evolution, which safeguards us by warning when something threatens our survival. Why should society refuse to use a highly perfected survival mechanism? However, that period was loaded with pre-scientific pseudo-psychological nonsense. As for unusual, punishment must be unusual or it serves no purpose. Back to these young criminals. They probably were not spanked as babies. They certainly were not flogged for their crimes. The usual sequence was, for a first offense, a warning, a scolding, often without trial. After several offenses, a sentence of confinement, but with sentence suspended and the youngster placed on probation. A boy might be arrested many times and convicted several times before he was punished. And then it would be merely confinement, with others like him from whom he learned still more criminal habits. If he kept out of major trouble while confined, he could usually evade most of even that small punishment. Be given probation, paroled in the jargon of the times. This incredible sequence could go on for years while his crimes increased in frequency and viciousness, with no punishment whatever save rare, dull, but comfortable confinements. Then suddenly, usually by law on his 18th birthday, this so-called juvenile delinquent becomes an adult criminal and sometimes wound up in only weeks or months in a death cell awaiting execution for murder. Again, they began discussing punishment for dogs. A young lady chimes in and asks why. I don't know, he answered grimly, except the time-tested method of instilling social virtue and respect for law in the minds of the young did not appeal to the pre-scientific, pseudo-professional class who called themselves social workers or sometimes child psychologists. It was too simple for them, apparently, since anybody could do it, using only the patience and firmness needed in training a puppy. I have sometimes wondered if they cherished a vested interest in disorder, but that is unlikely. Adults almost always act from conscious higher motives, no matter what their behavior. The tragic wrongness of what those well-meaning people did, contrasted with what they thought they were doing, goes very deep. They had no scientific theory of morals. They did have a theory of morals, and they tried to live by it. I should not have sneered at their motives, but their theory was wrong. Half of it fuzzy-headed wishful thinking, half of it rationalized charlatanry. The more earnest they were, the further it led them astray. You see, they assumed that man had a moral instinct. Sir, I thought, but he does. I have. No, my dear, you have a cultivated conscience, a most carefully trained one. Man has no moral instinct. He is not born with moral sense. You were not born with it. I was not. And a puppy has none. We acquire moral sense. When we do, through training, experience, and hard sweat of the mind. These unfortunate juvenile criminals were born with none, even as you and I, and they had no chance to acquire any. Their experiences did not permit it. What is moral sense? It is an elaboration of the instinct to survive. The instinct to survive is human nature itself, and every aspect of our personalities derives from it. Anything that conflicts with the survival instinct acts sooner or later to eliminate the individual, and thereby fails to show up in future generations. I tried to hit the more pertinent parts in order to be brief. I'm sure everyone listening gets the point. We are living in the society he mentioned today. Criminals are not punished, which means, in effect, law-abiding citizens are punished for the crimes of criminals. So, it's just something to think about. It's hard not to think about it when we see it constantly happening. Anyway, guys, as usual, I thank you for listening. I appreciate your comments, likes or dislikes. I hope as always, that you got something out of this. I hope you have a good night and a great week. Thank you for listening.